Hello, I'm Mr. Hutchings, and thank you for tuning in to Mr. Hutchings History. Today's topic is 5.10 of the AP World History program, Continuity and Change in the Industrial Age, from 1750 to 1900. Our AP themes will be economic systems, social interactions and organization, governance, technology and innovation, and finally, environmental impacts. Our historical reasoning skill in this episode will be continuity and change over time. When students hear the phrase industrial revolution, they often imagine complete transformation, new machines, new cities, new ways of life. And much of that is true. But historians ask a more careful question: what actually changed? And what quietly continued beneath the surface? The industrial age produced dramatic innovation, but it also preserved older hierarchies, older patterns of power, and it preserved inequalities. This episode brings Unit 5 together by examining both continuity and change, the central historical skill for this topic. The most visible change of the industrial age was economic. Production shifted from skilled artisans working at their own pace to factory labor organized around machines and assembly lines. Steam power, coal, and later electricity allowed goods to be mass produced faster, cheaper, and in greater variety than ever before. Factories replaced cottages. Wage labor replaced household production. Corporations replaced small workshops. Yet, not everything was new. Profit seeking, trade, and inequality existed long before industrialization. What changed was scale. Capitalism expanded globally, but the basic drive for wealth remained constant. How can an economic system change dramatically while its core incentives remained the same? Because technology can transform production methods without changing the underlying goal of profit and accumulation. Industrialization reorganized the global economy, but it did not make it more equal. Western Europe and the United States became dominant industrial producers. Regions such as Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia continued to supply raw materials as they had in earlier eras. Cotton from Egypt and India, minerals from Latin America and Africa, rubber and timber from the Southeast Asia fed industrial factories abroad. What changed was speed and volume. What remained was unequal exchange. Industrialization intensified earlier global patterns rather than replacing them. Industrialization reshaped social hierarchies. A large industrial working class emerged, dependent on factory wages and vulnerable to unemployment, injury, and exploitation. A rapidly expanding middle class of managers, professionals, and clerks gained education, political influence, and gained cultural authority. At the top, wealthy industrial capitalists replaced land owning aristocrats as society's most powerful group. Yet, hierarchy itself did not disappear. The poor remained poor, the wealthy retained power. Class divisions hardened rather than dissolved. This shows continuity beneath change. Social inequality persisted even as its form shifted. Women's roles changed significantly, but unevenly. In agricultural societies, women worked largely without wages. Industrialization brought millions of women into factories, where their incomes became essential to family survival. Yet women were paid less than men, excluded from high wage jobs, and denied political rights. Middle class ideals of domesticity restricted women even as working class women labored outside the home. Industrialization expanded women's economic participation but preserved gender inequality. Why might economic participation not automatically lead to political equality? Because cultural norms and legal systems can limit rights even when economic roles change. The industrial age intensified political pressure. Workers and middle class citizens demanded voting rights, legal protections, and an end to aristocratic privilege. Revolutions in 1848 across Europe signaled rising expectations for participation. Over time, voting rights expanded to non landowners and expanded to working class men, especially in countries with large middle classes. But continuity remained clear. Women were excluded from voting until the 20th century. In regions with weak middle classes, authoritarian rule persisted. Political change occurred, but unevenly and incompletely. The industrial age also preserved and transformed ideas. Enlightenment principles of natural rights and popular sovereignty continued to influence reform movements. At the same time, new ideologies emerged in response to industrial capitalism. Adam Smith promoted free markets. Karl Marx condemned exploitation and called for revolutionary change. Labor leaders demanded reform rather than revolution. Old ideas about justice and power persisted, but they were reshaped by industrial realities. Humans had altered environments long before industrialization, but the industrial age multiplied that impact. Coal mining, deforestation, polluted rivers, and urban smog transformed landscapes. Cities like London and Manchester became symbols of environmental degradation. Yet the idea that nature existed to be exploited for human use remained unchanged. What changed was scale, speed, and permanence. Topic 5.10 demonstrates why historians avoid simple narratives of progress or decline. The industrial age changed production, cities, and technology. It also preserved inequality, preserved hierarchy, and preserved exploitation. The industrial age expanded rights slowly and unevenly. The industrial age also deepened global economic imbalance. This topic reinforces the essential AP skill of continuity and change over time, identifying what shifts and what endures. Industrialization transformed how humans lived and worked, but it did not erase the past. Old power structures adapted, inequality evolved rather than vanished, progress arrived, but at a cost. Understanding history means recognizing that change rarely replaces continuity. Instead, change reshapes continuity. Why is it important to study what stays the same as much as what changes? Because continuity explains why problems persist even when societies modernize. Change alone does not guarantee justice. The industrial age created the modern world, economically, socially, and politically, but it also passed forward unresolved questions about power, fairness, and responsibility. Those questions will define the next era. I'm Mr. Hutchings, and thank you for listening to this episode. As always, continue to study history. It matters.